Firstly, let us welcome our guests today. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for showing up on a Saturday evening. And so basically, for us, career in IP law is something that we hear a lot about, right? When people are in college, when you go to college, actually IP law is probably one of the better, more interesting subjects that you study. Let's say compared to a civil procedure code, definitely people find IP law more palatable when they study. And they think that IP law practice must be like that, okay? So, and in my experience, at least when I talk to law students, they have very little idea about what IP law practice is about. They think they know like this section of Copyright Act or sections of Patent Act, and they think that okay, this is what I'll be doing, but no realistic idea of what the practice of IP law is actually about. So, for example, you might be drafting, lot of work may be involved in registration and filing of various kind of trademark, right? On the other hand, there is this academic side of IP law where in college there's a lot of emphasis on some really things that you may never get to do, like geographical indications and sui generis, models of IP and traditional knowledge and etc. And while you spend time studying those things, you're highly unlikely that in a law firm you're going to ever encounter them, or even if you practice IP on your own, you're going to ever encounter them, right? Now, what happens is that because of a lack of understanding of what practice of IP law is actually like, students are not able to prepare themselves in a way that enables them to succeed in the career the way they want. So there is one possibility that if you find out what practice of IP law involves, you might not even choose it. Okay, but when you are in college, you have romantic notions about what IP law practice is about, and you might end up making the wrong choice. But if you do like IP law, after knowing what the practice is like, then you must understand that okay, these are the skills that I have to develop in order to succeed in this practice, right? If you don't develop those skills, then it will be a failure for you, right? It will be very difficult to succeed, or you'll have a bad start in your first job, right? Where you are struggling, you must have heard of a lot of stories about how people have nervous breakdowns in law firms, or they spend too many hours at night, do not get to sleep enough, fall sick. I can tell you from my experience that a lot of that I think was completely unavoidable. I worked in a law firm, not in IP, but the story is same even if you do any other law. Usually what happens is that your lack of initial knowledge or expertise on the subject, so you're thrown into the sea directly and you don't know how to swim, and you're like, okay, cross the English Channel. Okay, it'll be hard, and it is like that. The 5 years of law school or 3 years of law school that was supposed to prepare you for the job, and in that you have done 1 semester or 2 semester of IP law, where you have studied some sections and case laws, absolutely do not prepare you for a career in IP law. So when you are in the job, you are trying to learn what has to be done, and at the same time you are trying to fight the work pressure, the deadlines and everything, right? It is a stressful situation even for senior lawyers. So for example, we have Niharika and Shilpa with us today, and even if they are a little higher up, they have juniors under them. When they will be working with those lawyers, they would have a lot of struggle, because how do I make these junior lawyers productive? How do I get them to work and deliver a kind of work that I can actually give to the client? And I am not spending way too much time cleaning up that work that they have given to us, right? This is the challenge. So on both sides there's a challenge. Junior lawyers are facing a problem, senior lawyers are facing a problem. The senior lawyer, maybe mid-level or high-level, they are struggling that, if I can save a little bit of time, I would like to go home early to my kids, right? Or I would like to go spend time with my family or with my friends. Why should they spend a lot of time in the office training the kids, right? So this problem is extremely common, and that's why we thought that today's session should be about discovering, number one, what are the opportunities, okay, in IP law, and how it has shifted, how it used to be. The way it used to be 10 years back, it's absolutely not like that now. There was a time when you could make a lot of money from simply registering trademarks. And there was a time when firms, many law firms, IP law firms, why are there so many IP law firms? You don't see so many arbitration law firms. You know why? Because there was a time when you could simply register hundreds of trademarks a month and charge 30,000, 40,000 for a single class, single mark, even more. People have charged 1 lakh to register a trademark in one class. And then MNC will come and say, I want this registered across 30 or 37, I think, are there. Classes of trademarks. So that means 37 lakh from one client, right? Only for doing paperwork. There is no extremely difficult challenge over there. So it was highly scalable, and you could hire more and more lawyers, pay them a decent salary, and just register trademark after trademark. And it was enough to set up a practice. Today, it doesn't work. There will be some India filings or some Vakil search doing that for 4,000. And if somebody comes to a law firm, even law firms are not able to charge 1 lakh rupees to register a trademark anymore. But that is how it was back in, say 2000 even, or 1996. Okay. Anyway, so very important thing is that there is a dynamic change happening in the IP industry. So things have moved away from how they used to be 10 years back, in terms of where the opportunities are, where the skills are needed. So today we'll try to understand that okay, what are the opportunities and what skills are needed to actually make ourselves suitable for those opportunities, and so that we'll be highly in demand in the market, either for clients or for employers. Okay, so that's okay. That's the more or less the agenda we have today. That's fine. Anybody has any questions or suggestions at this point? Nothing. Okay, great. So so let's start. So let's welcome the panelists today. So we have Deepshika. So why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Deepshika Sarkar. I work as an associate at this law firm called Sai Krishna and Associates, and I work mainly with IP litigation, and as well as I do IT and media litigation as well. So my work area is mostly litigation and contentious stuff, but then we do advisory as well, especially in information technology for tech companies. And I've been in the profession for little, I'm just inching towards my completion of my second year, and I'm glad to be on the panel, and I'm very sorry that I was late today.
Hi, I'm Niharika, and I am working as a LawSeco trademark prosecution faculty. And at the same time, I'm working with Juris Consultants, and I lead their IP practice. And my practice is more towards copyright and trademark prosecution. And I have been in this field for 2.5, 3 years now.
Hi, I'm Shilpa Das. I'm working with Sai Krishna and Associates currently, and my area of work is media transaction mostly, and something that has very recently come up in the market. You could relate, actually mostly related to OTT platforms and their transactions. So and we again, we do some advisory work as well for certain companies related to these transactions, and I have been working with this firm in this sector for a very short period of time now, just few months. There. And before that, I was working with LawSeco right here in this office, and I was designing courses for IP and media law here.
Great, thank you. So, so when I asked for suggestions for faculty members, I got generally people say, call the very, senior people who are partners in law firms, which we have done many times. But then sometimes we realize that those people are not able to tell us the things we need to know because they are a little too ahead. Okay, sometimes we call them also. But the point is that I really wanted you to speak with people and get to learn from people who are right there, they are building their career in the IP space at different levels. And I think given given that most of you want, if interested in beginning your career in IP in some form or the other, or at least exploring, trying to figure out, am I interested? So I think this is a great place to start from. And the other thing is that all three have been connected with Lawsico in some way or the other. Deepshika has been a student, and yeah, you want to?
So last, I think 2017, November, December, and January, I was here as a student, and I was a part of the Dream Job Boot Camp which Abhyuday and Ramanuj were running. And after the completion of 3 months is when I got an interview with Sai Krishna, and then so on and so forth after that. So if, like, as Ramanuj began speaking about what we're going to speak about today in IP specifically, so what I can share with you guys is mostly related to IP lit, okay, because that's what I do majorly. So in that, I was just thinking on my way. Yeah, sure.
Surely I'll ask you that. I just wanted to kind of draw a picture for them on, what is the work landscape like. Okay, so that will give them a framework to start from. So, in IP, there's, like this patent, there's trademark, there's copyright. These are three primary. Trade secret also, which is contractual. GI and other things. I am not, trade secrets, traditional knowledge and all of that. Now, those I am not going into because there's not much work. So, when I asked lawyers on a, a informal survey that, how much work are you getting? So, the size of the market seems to be more or less, and you guys can confirm from your experience, is like, almost 80% of the work is related to trademark. Okay. There may be 10-15% will be related to copyright or less, perhaps even less. Okay. Maybe it is possible that trademark is more than 80%. And patent is like perhaps 2 to 5%, not more than that. Okay, like if you see that how much work is there, because that's also important, right? Now, it is not necessary that if something is much smaller, you should not do it. That's not what we are suggesting. We're not suggesting that, okay, there's a lot of trademark work, so totally go for that only and nothing else. But what happens is that in a niche area, you might be able to charge more, and that is true for in anything else also, but generally niche areas, we see that in legal industry that rates are higher, clients are ready to pay more money for similar hours of work or similar volume of work. Apart from that, one thing you need to keep in mind is that in all IP, there are more or less 3 types of work we see. One is registration, filing is one major area. There is another area is related to IP contracts, okay, assignment, licensing, franchising, like some contract or the other related to the brand or related to the technology or related to any kind of patent, trademark, copyright, whatever, in the movie industry, tech industry. There are 2 industries which are, okay, let me finish this first. So this is the second kind of work, contracts, right? The third kind of work that is there and right now really growing in a big way is IP litigation. Okay, because whenever you have any disputes over either registration or over any of these contracts, it becomes a dispute, right? Or any kind of infringement of IP, right? So that goes to dispute. So there's a dispute thing. If you say there's a fourth kind of work, it is related to IP management or monitoring services, okay? Where basically a brand will tell or a patent owner will tell a law firm that you provide us a monitoring services, that anybody infringes this, if find out, investigate, get evidence, sue them, etc. But that also again goes into litigation, but that is, you can say that this is a separate branch of IP services, if at all there is anything else. Now these are the 4 types of work that IP law firms or IP lawyers do. Okay. Initially when globalization started, right, in 1990s, there's a lot of work related to registration of patents, of even trademark, even copyright. People started registering. Why? Because there was an explosion of foreign companies coming into India, also Indian companies trying to become brand. It's a different kind of economy. Economic growth happened, so there are more brands, more companies, more businesses, and that happened. And so registration, etc., was an extremely lucrative area of work for IP lawyers. Later, what happened is that shifted to, like, that became, like, there were a lot of players came up, like, people are ready to charge you 4,000 rupees and do a registration. So it becomes very hard then, to keep doing that. So what the next area that became lucrative and interesting is contracts. Okay, there was a time when IP contracts were so niche and so exclusive that you could not find more than 5 firms in the country to do it. Okay, nobody else knew how to do it. But over time, it spread and spread, and now it is so commonplace that companies are preferring to hire in-house counsels to do their contracts work. They don't want to go to a law firm because it costs more, right? It is not such a niche thing anymore. Any lawyer out there probably will do that for you. And the way things are going, tomorrow you will have automated contracts, which are like generated, I have seen like software, like there's a software Mercedes uses, below a certain amount, below like $1,000, any contract is auto-generated from a software, not by lawyers, by their, by employees who are not lawyers. And they're ready to give some legal training to those people and hire us to give them legal training. But they don't want to, they're figuring out how to reduce their costs, right? And what will be the most efficient way to do any of this. Now, given this, we expect that over time, even contracts work will reduce, or reduce in, at least it will reduce in lucrativeness. People are still doing registration work, right? So you have Vakil Search may have like like hundreds of people sitting and just doing trademark registration and all this every day. And eventually there'll be players which will be like sweatshops doing contracts. So it will be very hard to compete with them. Their value proposition will be that, we are really fast, we are really cheap, right? So that has also value proposition. But what happens because of this is that also the number of objections or mistakes in the filing, mistakes in the contracts is going up massively, right? If everybody is taking a registration, everybody is entering into agreements, naturally there, and especially from very cheap services, there are more disputes. The brighter side is that, right? So now if there are more disputes, then you can, so now when you have this picture, you may start to think that, if I have to learn skills and I see myself in IP, then are you saying that if I want to be a successful IP lawyer 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, most of my work will be in disputes? And my answer will be yes, probably so. Correct? So a lot of people, when they are thinking of doing IP, they are not necessarily thinking that, my work will be in disputes or in arbitration or in, or in courts, in enforcement or in investigation or monitoring, right? That's not what we normally think. But it seems that, yes, that is the way markets are headed. That's where the money seems to be more these days. And it is a trend. It is not only today. This trend will keep, becoming bigger over time. That is what at least my reading of the situation is. And of course, we have people who are doing IP work every day, so they can tell us better. So who wants to start? Maybe Niharika, you can share your experience.
Yeah. So when I was working with firms, actually when I first joined my first law firm work, that was with Watson Associates, and I was very fortunate to work with this wonderful lady, Miss Amna Hassan. And I remember she telling me that you're a fresh graduate, get your basics right first. Whatever field in IP you want to practice. So my first week, in fact, first 2 weeks were just reviewing the trademark rules. And I'm going to talk very specific about trademarks and copyrights because those are the only 2 fields I've practiced in IP. So yes, I agree with Ramanuj that the world, in fact, the IP world is heading towards litigation and more of contentions matter. But I feel that if your basics are not right, you cannot win a litigation matter. So the fact that how to draft a trademark application, what are the like basic details required for trademark application, if you can't understand that, then I mean the chances of you becoming a good litigation lawyer is less. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. But
Just because you are not doing registration does not mean you stop learning about registration.
no,
So that is
but
necessary.
just filling a form TMA is not getting registration. Understanding the classes, understanding the goods, understanding the mark, advising your client whether one should go for a word mark, whether one should go for device mark, conducting a trademark search. This process of creating one small trademark application is 2 to 3 weeks long of due diligence. And the moment you get your trademark application right, half of your battle is already won. And a lot of, I remember I was working with, in my second firm, United IP, I was working very closely with the litigation team, and even though I was in the prosecution team, I was assisting the litigation team, and the litigation team used to come and ask me the prosecution questions, and they used to be really basic, that if we are going to file the case against this person B, what are the essential details we need to put in our trademark application? And that strategizing those documents and advice from the client used to like take 2 to 3 weeks. So my advice to whoever, whether in law school, graduated from the law school, thinking about IP practice, or right now interning, will be to read as much as you can about IP prosecution, because prosecution is the first step. And I'll just clarify, prosecution means when you are filing the trademark application, when you are trying to get your mark registered, that stage is called prosecution, and it's at the tribunal level. Try to intern as much as you can. I was very fortunate to work with Cyprus. Yeah.
Can you start by giving some ideas
Sure.
on, where you see the, like when you joined, you were telling like you joined, you were told to learn the basics. What were the challenges you faced as a young lawyer?
Yeah, okay. That's a long list. So the challenges were that I'm from Jindal Global Law School, and I graduated in 2011. And by that time, I was quite fortunate to have professors who were themselves recent graduates. So they exactly knew what we were going through. And when I decided to pursue trademark law, specifically trademark law, not IP practice, I remember my professor told me that you need to know the rules, because trademark rules, copyright rules, patent rules, those are the things that law schools will never teach you. And you will only be introduced to them once you get into practice. So that was my major challenge. If nobody is teaching me that, I can't just open the Bare Act and start reading the rules and without understanding the application. For that, I wanted to intern, and that's when I interned with Sai Krishna and got like the best kind of guidance. So one of the major challenges was to find the right guidance. And for that, like I figured out, so you should try to meet as many IP lawyers as you can to get the real idea. And I think that's what the main motto of this talk was. The other was securing the internships, of course. As a first generation lawyer, it was always very difficult to find internships in IP law, in specific to IP. And I also attended talks to get internships. So that was the second challenge that I faced. Third was just to kind of pinpoint, I mean, at that time I didn't know if I wanted to practice trademark law, but pinpoint which practice is good for me. Everything looks fancy. Copyright is a wonderful field of IP. It's upcoming in India, so it's kind of lucrative. Within copyright law, I don't know if you know about this, Ramanuj, but the fourth part of IP that's upcoming is art law. Art law is It's booming right now, but nobody really knows about it. I also got to know when I was studying it for my masters, and I took in art law as a subject, and then I realized this is a lot of basic contractual work, but art law is lucrative and it's booming. But law schools will not teach you that, will not tell you that. So keep your eyes open, understand what other fields there are, so that
I can like totally start with challenges in workplace. So I graduated in 2017, and when I joined Sai Krishna and Associates, it might sound very wishy-washy, but it's like persevering and showing up every day. Like when you're having 18-hour work days, they don't train you that you have to churn out good work product day in, day out, day in, day out. So sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, but I think that is something that I faced, like that was like in my face. Because to make it a little more relatable for you guys, it's like the rest of your life is one day before the end sem now. Like every day, that's what's going to happen. So that's one problem I faced. Secondly, the problem I faced was what basically law school didn't teach me is what I felt is the basic skill to be at a workplace. That is one of the basic skills was drafting. When we draft for courts, when we do drafting of pleadings, it's a very different draft from what we do when we are doing advisory, right? When we are making an advisory email, that's a very different thing, or a memo or anything like that. But when we are drafting for court, it's very different. That is a skill set that they don't teach you in court, although you might have a pleading drafting paper in the 10th sem, which is like, I don't know, at least in my college it was good for nothing. So apart from that, if I have to share, as she shared about her area of practice, the major part of the litigation that I do is copyright, and we usually we work for copyright societies, and we also do a lot of litigation for tech companies. So, but that's tech law and that's a little different, so I'll just keep that aside. So with IP, as she said, and I completely agree with her, that you have to have an idea of prosecution. And as she said, I was one of those associate running to the prosecution team and asking her, do we need this document because I have to file this trademark infringement matter, you know? So learning prosecution and learning the basic rules and the law is very important. And secondly, I think for litigation, something whenever I used to intern at different law firms, whenever I used to ask the partners for feedback, they used to tell me, read case law. I said, I used to be like, what, just read the case law? I mean, like, what do I do? Just open the book and read the case law. But when you start your practice, you realize that you have to be abreast with the case law, at least in the courts that you're practicing. The practice that my team does in the firm is mostly limited to the Delhi High Court, and at least the original side judges, all the judges that sit in the original side, we have to be abreast with what their minds are working with at that span of time, right? If they are giving, suppose, pro e-commerce company orders, or if they are giving pro owner orders in copyright matters or trademark matters, we have to be like, that's like something that they would not teach you. At that time, at least, at that time, okay, so, yeah, I mean, this is not, I don't think that you can ever like find a manual for this, and I'm sure that when all of you will be practicing, I'm sure you will have a different kind of outlook or a different thing that you would want to share forward. But I think one of the main problems that I faced when I had joined was like, just churning out good quality work day in and day out, meeting deadlines. These are some things which are not like, law related or something very legal, as to say, but more of logistics. But that is something they don't train you for, and that's a soft skill that you develop at work. That's what I feel.
So, you are from KIIT, right?
No, I'm from
NLU Ranchi, okay. So we went to KIIT and they asked us, what practical training you can give our students in a month, okay? So what we did is that we basically said, we'll teach them to sit down for 4 hours and draft a contract. Okay, and we made people for the entire month, they gave them like exemption in some subjects, and all the students used to do was to come to the class or from hostel, it doesn't matter, but they had to draft for 4 hours and submit it. Like it'll start with a opening session where we'll brief them about the problem, then they'll solve it for 3 hours, and then half an hour in the end we'll discuss that what they did. Now, when we saw the feedback after like a few months, right? No, sorry, at the end of all the sessions, the feedback was that I never knew that I can sit down and work on one document for this long. And most law students lack that rigor, right? Most lawyers, for that matter, lack that rigor, that I can sit down and do this much work. The best lawyers I've worked with, they have rigor of being able to not only of just writing, you know, that they can sit and write or work on a document, but being able to apply their mind throughout that process, throughout the time, and like, you know, and in the end of the day also coming up with great ideas as to what can be done next. So I think that's something is absolutely a bang on, Deepshika. Like biggest thing for somebody wanting to work, our strategy in Dream Job Bootcamp for that matter is that make people work that long hours. You know, we tell people you have to write 2 articles every day, and they're like, what is this nonsense? How is that possible? But when you are trying to write a 1500 word article in 4 hours, it's very hard, of course, but it trains you to focus your mind in a certain way, structure things down, be quick with your research, and the rigor that, you know, you're it's hard, but you're doing it every day. It changes the way you think. There was a student, I remember, she interned with us and we told her you write 50 articles, and she did. And she used to be like, you know, on the top 10 in NLU Jodhpur, one student. And she went back, and then she called me one day and she said that, sir, I have topped this year, in this semester I have topped in my class. I said, that's great, but why are you like, congratulations, why are you calling me? She's like, it happened because my mind has now completely changed. My brain has changed, I think. I said, okay, how? She's like, after I wrote 2 articles every day, my brain is not the same anymore. Like, you know, the way I process information, the speed with which I read, the speed with which I function is completely changed. I used to take weeks. I would sit in the front of the book and spend weeks, but still not cover more than 2 chapters sometimes. And only before the exam I'll study. Now I can study at will. I'm like, wow, that's great. That's what being a lawyer is about, right? So you're sitting in the court and you're reading. You're traveling and you don't care. Like, you don't say that, you know, I don't have time. And that's the difference between lawyers who are successful and the lawyers who are not successful. Okay, the people who say I'm not getting a job, you'll see lawyers getting fired from their job every 6 months. Okay, and lots of toppers from colleges joining law firms and leaving so-called within a few months. Many of them have been fired. I'm not saying all of them are fired. Some of them leaving because they can't handle that. Exactly, that is the gap. Okay, so I think excellent point, Deepshika. Thank you for bringing it up. Okay, why don't we hear from Shilpa?
Okay, so so yeah, I'll definitely agree with fellow panelists saying that it's very, very important to be able to concentrate for that long hours on one particular problem, thinking about that, because generally we happen to digress. We happen to just, you know, get diverted, but then focusing on one point and then again thinking from different perspectives, that is also very important, I think. I have practiced for a few years and now I'm doing a lot of contracts. So what I find is common in both these kinds of work is that being able to switch perspective when you're drafting even a petition or a contract. When you're drafting a contract from a production, like a Prodco's perspective, you need to think in a certain way. You need to think about the rights and the reps and warranties in the contract from the production house's perspective. But when you're drafting it from the artist's perspective, so it depends on who your client is, whose rights are you trying to safeguard through that contract. So I'm sure it works in litigation as well. I have not done much of IP litigation, but then in any kind of litigation, there are different parties. So the party that you are drafting the petition for, so you should be able to switch sides and also think from different perspectives and give them the best legal support that you can through that document. So that happens only with practice. There is no other way out. So the earlier you start doing that, hands-on, the better for you.
So in your experience, what are the 2-3 challenges you faced when you started doing IP? You had done some other work before.
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah.
When you started doing IP last 6 months, like what are the bigger challenges, your difficulties, or what are the skills that, let's say, you didn't have before and you're trying to develop now? If you can share that.
Then I have to talk about Losico as well because because when I was working very closely with Abhyuday here, and I was designing and basically working on the content of all the IP. I have worked with Niharika as well on that. So basically on the IP and media law courses of Losico. While doing that, so before that I did my LLM on IP law, but then the difference that I learned here was working on that, not being a student, but more from a faculty's perspective, and that's why it has been really intense, I would say. So, but then it was a very, very good learning experience for me because it was focused on the practical challenges that a student, we used to think from the student's perspective all the time. So you can go online, read up blogs. There are many IP blogs right now and popular ones. So you can go online, you can Google, you can read up cases, you can do all of that by yourselves. What you cannot do by yourself, or maybe you can, but then better with assistance, is that learning the practical necessities when it comes to real work. So talking of that, I will talk from more from media law perspective. So I would like to ask them a question that, like, what kind of work do you think that media law might involve? Anyone? Steps of work that if a film is getting produced or if web series is getting made, what are the legal steps that they have to go through from inception of the idea to release? Nothing? Distribution of the content at different platforms. Talent contracts, correct. Anything else? Yeah, that is a part of distribution only, yeah. Anything else? So what happens, the content, from the script, right from the inception, there are due diligence which are being done on the idea of a show or a movie. Then the scripts, they also, they go through a legal scrutiny. So just to make sure that, they can cut down on copyright infringement, trademark infringement in the script. Yeah, those things are always there. A lot of constitution is also there. So yeah. So all of this happened, and after that, distribution is definitely a part of it. And then a lot of talent contracts with the actors, musicians, production house, and OTT platforms now, because they generally, you must have seen that Netflix and Amazon Prime, they show a lot of movies after they are released, after a point of time. So they license those movies from the production house, and then they stream those movies on their platform. So there is a lot of legal work happening in the media sector that we generally do not come to know if we don't have to work on them. It does not really strike us, right? Like we go for a movie, we watch it, nice, okay, fine, not good, okay, cool. That's it for most of us. But then the whole procedure runs through all of these steps, which involve a lot of legal steps as well. So first of all, this information that these kind of work exist, people do this kind of work, that is, I think, knowing that information is the first challenge. Because until unless you read up from that perspective, or you gather a particular particular niche information in this area, it's not very easy to think of that, okay, this can also be a way of work, this can also be a part of work. So that is the first thing. Secondly, understanding all of this work separately, and then being able to do all of these work maybe in 1 week, because there are times when we get 10 types of different works from different clients and we have a strict deadline. So once you're doing due diligence, and then you're doing a script clearance report, and then suddenly you're doing a contract, so a lot of switching happens there. So I think, we would rather think from an outsider's perspective that, okay, if I can do a distribution contract really well, and I keep doing distribution contract every day, so I will definitely gain expertise in distribution contract. And after a point of time, I'll just know it. I won't have to put in like extra effort in understanding. So it'll just be organic in my system. But that is not how it works. So when you actually go and work in this sector, you have to switch between all of these works. And you won't have time to, learn and cope and let yourself sink in. No. That is not going to happen. So
that's how it happens, but that is the challenge. That is why people struggle and why they kind of suffer in a way.
absolutely. So first of all, knowing this thing that all of this kind of work can come to you, and secondly, being able to concentrate in the particular work that you're doing on a particular day or on a particular span of time is very important. And training your mind and brain in that will take you time and practice. There is no shortcut to that. So in whatever field you want to do, you want to go, this is very, very important to gain practical experience in that.
So if you can share one or two examples from personal experience, what did you struggle with when you joined?
Oh, I struggle with contracts. Oh my God, yeah. Yeah. So these contracts, so it sounds very fancy, like from a layman's perspective, ke acha, okay, so this movie, this Yash Raj and all of these like big names are involved. I have a fancy towards media, so I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, Netflix and this thing happening, okay, fine, great. But then when it comes to real contract, it's not that flowery. It is not. Definitely not. Okay. So it's very, very technical, very, very specific, and you have to really put in a lot of effort to understand even one contract in a day. Even if you have to do one contract in a day, which is very little work, considering the workload that we generally have, it's very little work. If you have a day for a contract, it's a great day at work. So, but then even if you have that kind of time, you will not be able to, most certainly not be able to, no matter how brilliant you are, how sharp you are, you will not be able to do that flawlessly on the first go. So the first learning point might be to accept that, okay, it's not going to happen. But then, again, to accept and to admit and to take this challenge that, okay, but it's going to happen in some time. So maybe not on the first day, but day 2, day 3, and then on, it'll improve. Because contract is definitely a skill thing, and once if you do your 5th DVLA, and digital video licensing agreement, the amount of time and effort that you'll have to invest in that will definitely be different from the 50th one that you're doing. So you will learn. It's not that you cannot do it, but then initially, of course, it's difficult.
So one challenge was that. So no drafting contract.
That's the biggest one, yeah.
any other one?
Okay, so yeah, for me, yeah, from my personal experience, one thing is that I did not have a very clear idea of how the media industry works. Okay, so when I say Prodco, when I say production company, when I say production house, and when I say who are the producers, who are the distributors, who are executive producers, and different people who are involved in this whole business, I did not have a fair idea of the business. So initially, when I was asked to draft a contract, for me to read up and understand the business was the first thing. कि किसके लिए करना है और क्यों करना है ठीक है
What are their interests?
Exactly. अगर business clear नहीं होगा दिमाग में, so you will never understand कि what are the rights that you want to safeguard for that person, whether that person would they be okay with more options of work, or they would like to limit the options. So you'll have to draft the clause accordingly. If you do not understand the business, if you do not understand his interest or his rights or his way of working in the business, it's impossible to work on a contract. It's impossible. You cannot call your client and ask every time, okay, do you want this, do you want that? Half the time they will be confused. They will be like, I have hired you for all this work. Right? I've hired you for understanding what are my legal rights and what are you supposed to, what will be the best for me to safeguard. So you need to understand their business. That is very true. I think that is true for every practice, that like even in tech law or trademark, it's very important to have a clear idea of the business, which law schools never ever teach you. They don't. Even law firms don't. So you will have to teach yourself. So mostly, yeah. So that is.
That is two. I think those are very good insights. So thank you. So actually, this is pretty much the same theme across any industry, anything you do. Learning about the industry knowledge, we continuously hear this from everybody that that there is a lot of problem with respect to industry knowledge, and junior lawyers are struggling to pick up the industry related understanding, right? So if you are doing, even for that matter, let's say you're doing private equity, you have to understand how the private equity investment world functions, who are the people putting money, who are the people in the middle, who are the fund managers, what are their expectations, what are the different kind of firms, right? It is not written in anywhere in the law, but this is the business, and if you don't understand it, you can't really function in that world. So it's the same thing in media and IP. One important thing, so now that Shilpa has mentioned it, I think we should mention that who are the biggest clients of IP law firms or IP lawyers for that matter, right? Two major industries. One is technology, the other is media. Okay, these are two biggest clients they have. They also have fashion, manufacturing, everybody is there, retail. Sure. So if you look at where would you work as an IP lawyer, that's a question I would request even other panelists to take up, that where can I work if I am a lawyer who has expertise in IP? The answer is either you will work in the legal industry, law firms related to IP, that's one option, or you'll be an IP lawyer yourself independently. The other option is that you might work in tech industry, or you may work in the media industry. These are very highly likely. Also, I have seen IP lawyers working for banks also. It's not like that you don't have application in elsewhere, right? Any product-based companies, consumer-facing companies will have trademarks, labels. Everybody has. Plus, you have, whenever you look at, art and fashion and anywhere there's any creative industry, there is a great possibility of, if sports law, like, actually sports may, it's it's not, I shouldn't say sports law, but sports industry, okay? Sports industry needs IP lawyers in a big way, because they make their money from licensing their rights, etc., right? So how can, absolutely, so their money is coming from some sort of IP, so they need IP lawyers. So so media and entertainment, on any kind of entertainment, and also any creative industry where you are creating IP, then it is really highly IP lawyer intensive. There are also biotech companies, pharma companies, they also need, because then they are dealing with patents, right? And software tech, we have already said. So these are the few potential places where you get to work. Now, if you guys can also share, options in terms of where people could work, or anything you know about what are the. No, you can talk about where to start with. You can talk about the difference in different kind of workplaces. That will be good.
Yeah, so I chose to answer that question because I did my master's. So initially it helped me a lot in getting the global knowledge. So I was actually, when they were discussing their struggles, one of the main struggles that I had when I joined a law firm was to understand the global standards. IP is a very global thing. It's not just specific to India. The laws may be different, but India borrows a lot of laws from international countries, especially Europe and US. They are booming with IP right now. They introduce a new bill every now and then, and there are a lot of international protocols and conventions that India is a party to. So for me, masters helped me to that extent that I was able to understand those conventions really, really well. Though these kind of conventions are not really discussed, the global standards are not discussed in Indian law schools or even in Indian firms. So when I joined the firm, we had a lot of global clients, and those global clients, I was able to understand what exactly they wanted, because I had studied the law in their country. I exactly knew what they would expect. So sometimes they used to complain that my trademark application is not proceeding fast, but in US this happens. In US there are different laws, but since I have studied the Lanham Act, I knew that this is where they're coming from. So I was able to advise them better that, see, under US law these things happen, under Indian law this thing happened. This is a better way for you to go forward. You file a major application. So all of that really helps you if you have a master's degree, and especially specific to IP law. I had specific to copyright and trademark, so I kind of did not focus too much on the patent law part. But yes, it does help you. Nobody will really give you too much credit for it. Like, I mean, it's just, it's not a necessity, but it's also not really, it's helpful in your practice, but it's not really recognized. Like, your boss is not going to. Yeah, it's helpful throughout. That I can vouch for. No, not just global clients. I mean, for an Indian client also, if they come to you, you would definitely want them to go international, you know. If they have that kind of a dream that I do want my brand to go abroad, you would be able to advise them better that, you know, this is the major protocol. This is under this convention, you have these rights as a brand holder. You go for this country, not this country. So that global knowledge becomes really important, and compared to somebody else, I feel that I had that edge over because I already knew those conventions. I had studied them. So that kind of helped me. But yeah, nobody's really going to recognize you that, oh, let's go with this one because she has a master's degree. Yeah, there's no that kind of like edge in that way.
Very much on the same line. Yeah. So when I studied IP, LLM in IP, from a worldwide perspective, it's very important to know who are the major players. So what exactly Niharika was pointing out, that US has the number one, the most developed IP laws in the world currently. And then EU is there, then China is a huge player. So from a different perspective, counterfeit, think of counterfeit, yeah. They have like proper mafia chains doing this. Yeah, so, but then India, unfortunately, at least currently, India's IP law is not one of the most developed ones. So there are a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of practical work that you might find in which Indian law will not say anything, will just be silent or grey or ambiguous. What do you do then? So if you have, since my LLM helped me having this idea of, okay, so I would just share one personal work experience. We had to do, we had to research for an advisory material for spoofs. Somebody wanted to make spoofs, and we had to advise them whether they can go ahead with their plan or not, whether that would attract any legal action or not. So on that, when we started working, initially, the idea was in the team that, okay, we just need to do a research from Indian perspective. Now, I knew that Indian law did not have a clear situation, lending out guidelines or something. There is nothing like that for spoofs. So if you are a person who wants to make a spoof and you want to just be on the safer side and follow certain guidelines, okay, Supreme Court ne ye bata diya, we'll just follow those 10 guidelines, then we are safe. There is nothing like that from Indian perspective. So since the situation was such that we started working from Indian perspective, but I knew that there is nothing on the Indian perspective, I had few US cases ready. Okay, because I had studied those cases. I knew what were the things that they had given out, and certain things are universal. Okay, certain things, especially with respect to IP, I think, certain things are universal. And for example, this spoof thing. So if that can attract, it might be different because like in the US, they sue for every little thing. So maybe in India, you can get away with it because a lot of people just don't want to get into that, issue of too much of time and money invested. Okay, let it be. Sometimes they don't know that they have this right which is being infringed. Okay, yes, that is very true. So in India, you can get away with things, but then when you advise a client, you do not want to bank on something that maybe you can get away with these things. Because that one spoof made by MTV some 10 years back, that did not attract any legal action, so this might also pass. But then it does not work like that. Time has changed. People have become more aware of their rights, and so are the sectors. So when you are doing a research like that, so like for me, it helped me in this particular work, having the knowledge that, okay, so this is not exactly how we should go about. Maybe we can borrow certain ideas from the US law or the international other laws, depends on the particular thing that you are working on. But knowing this information, that if I go through the US case laws, I will find this. I will know, I have read this. I know that this has been discussed in detail. So you just know where it is. And that does give you an edge over time, because if you don't know that, then you'll have to research, spend a lot of time from the Indian perspective to find out that there is nothing. And then spend more time to find out where is that, which country has that law. So that really does help.
Actually, LLM, and not just LLM, but just having a global perspective on IP issue. Just having a global perspective on IP issue really helps. Not just like, when I said, I did not really mean that LLM is the only way to get that global perspective. What I meant was that LLM helped me in getting that global perspective, but there's so many ways now to get global perspective. And I was actually thinking that when I'm taking Law Seeker classes, I really want to get that global perspective because this is really helpful now. And I mean, there were times when I used to get US, we had filed a major application and I used to get examination report from the US PTO. And I just knew what I have to answer and other associates did not. And I mean, this is a brutal fact, but within law firms, associates are very competitive. You have to be that, like she mentioned, churn out good work in less time. And you need to prove it to the partner that you have something that other associates don't. So that really helped me.
So I don't know how well placed I am to answer this question on NLM because I don't have a degree. But to me personally, I feel any academic degree should be for an academic purpose, mainly. Also, it should add to your skill set. And as both of them pointed out, I mean, I don't have a degree, but I don't have a problem in finding out US case laws, guys. I mean, it's not that tough, honestly. Yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah. So, yeah.
And that's why I corrected that it's not
Just an LLM degree, yeah. So, I feel that
getting that global
many a times, like many of my team members who are going in for an LLM degree, if you have a on-site in your mind that this will make me more employable, I do not think so. And as they rightly pointed out. But if you're really driven about a subject, if you're really like, I want to know what's happening I want to know what's happening in fashion law. I want to know how Italy and how Chanel is working and how the fashion industry in Europe is working. You want to know that, then, you should go ahead. You should totally go ahead because that is what will drive you. That is what will help you to study such a niche subject of law for a full academic year and write your thesis at the end of it. You have to be highly driven for that. Secondly, if you really want to, and this is just my experience, if you have to come back and do litigation in India, you have to open the CPC and the High Court rules and read it, guys. I'm just telling you the ground reality. You have to know that when your limitation is getting over, you have to know that in what format you have to file X schedule, Y schedule, Z schedule. It might sound morose and boring, but that is what is, that is what is your bread and butter. You have to show up to court, you have to brief counsel. Like that's what mostly, like, can I know that how many of you want to work in a law firm? Higher up, guys, like you really like half want. Yeah, not. Okay. So, and rest of you, if I might ask you? In-house, okay. All of you in-house? Who didn't raise their hand? Rest of them are undecided. So, for example, if you are doing litigation in a law firm, I just want to cut to the chase, and I want to tell you that not very much. They don't give you a lot of face time in court. They'll not give you face time in court unless you have to really you have to prove your mettle as an arguing counsel. And being an arguing counsel, guys, it's a different skill set altogether. Being a drafting counsel is if you're a drafting and a briefing counsel, that's a different skill set. And if you can master both, there's nothing like it. Like when we brief a lot of senior counsels, for example, we regularly brief Amit Sibal, Akhil Sibal, we brief Dayan Krishnan, these IP lawyers, we brief them. And we have often gotten to know that whenever these people, they started with their profession, they didn't have a lot of drafting experience. They started as arguing counsel. So that is their skill set. And of course, what they do in court, if you have briefed, for example, an NK call and then he's arguing for you in court, what they do in court is magic. I mean, it's like for me as a, budding litigator, when I stand there, I'm like, this is not argument. He's performing. He's performing. There's something called, getting an order, arguing and the judge giving you an order. And there's something called taking an order from the judge when the judge does not want to give it to you. And it's and you have to find that. initially, like when you go in, you have to find what is really driving me, because you have to, if you want to do something day in and day out for the rest of your life, it's not like, it's not college anymore that after 5 years khatam ho jayega, we leave. It's not, you know, masters anymore that after 2 years it's going to get over, you're going to leave. You have to have, like, you know, something that really drives you, that I want to get up and go to work every day and do this. Some days you might feel motivated, some days you might not. Like, I know I tend to digress and become a little like, not speak on the point, but I think these are the things that matter more than the technical aspects. If for me, as when I entered the firm, I wasn't that keen on doing litigation, right? But if you're an associate in a firm and your partner wants you to do litigation, you do litigation. Okay, I mean, if you're a part of that team, right? So if the client, if an advice that you've given that is leading to an contention, you will not say that, sorry, we don't do litigation, and go find another lawyer. You will do contentious matters for them as well. So when I started doing litigation, I think one of the main skill set is, first of all, drafting. When you learn to draft, and that's something that I think I am no good at yet either. Right, and then you have drafting, then you have filing, where you have where a lot of interns that come in our law firms, they think that stapling paper and page numbering is beneath their working standards, since they are giving us such niche, since they give us niche legal input. That is what they think, that we will ask them, give us pan-India litigation strategy for a company. They think that we are going to ask them. But let me tell you that I have spent nights paginating, and I have spent nights stapling paper. And guys, please do not think that it's anyway beneath you, because for me, I'll tell you how I look at it. I look at it that if I am doing a filing, that is my matter. So if it is my matter, I have complete ownership of it. And if I have complete ownership of it, I will be answerable for it. If something good happens, the client might say something good to the people who are at the forefront, but you will know that that's you, that's all you, right? So apart from that, then there's filing, then you brief a counsel. And then when you brief a arguing counsel, that's a different skill set. You have to know what you want your matter to turn on. Mostly, and also I think it's an important point to put forward when I'm speaking about IP litigation, is that mostly intellectual property litigation in India is about day one. Day one is where you ask for an injunction ex parte. Okay, that's where most of the litigation in India ends. There's an application under CPC, there's a provision. It is Order 39, and under Rule 1 and 2 of the Order 39, you file an application for ex parte ad interim injunction. That is, on day one, you go and say, this is my IP. It can be trademark as well as copyright. You say, this is my IP, I am the owner of this IP, and then you say, this is how it's being infringed. And for an ex parte ad interim injunction, there are three things that you have to show. You have to show that you have a prima facie case, you have to show that the balance of convenience is tilting in your favor, and that if they don't grant you that injunction, you will have an irreparable loss. So when you show that to the judge, and you getting that order on day one is half the game in IP litigation. So when you brief the counsel, you have to see how you want the matter to turn. Right, so that's also a skill that you slowly learn. And then, of course, there's arguments, and then the order is passed, whatever, or notice may be issued, whatever happens. So, and apart from that, second thing that I would like to say for litigation is that open the CPC and study. The CPC and the High Court rules that you will be practicing in, and not only like Delhi High Court, but we do pan-India matters. So, and in different courts, you learn that the judges are different, the approach is different, the rules are different, the filing is different, the way you draft is different in different courts. If I am drafting something for the Delhi High Court or the Bombay High Court, it's different from what I draft for the Madras High Court, and it'll all like come together slowly. And apart from that, is anything that I'm missing out that you guys want to know? See, I completely digress. Like, this is like, like what all I said, now you can match it with the LLM answer by thinking that would you need an LLM to do these things?
So first of all, can I finish the LLM point? Like, just wanted to make something. Okay, so doing an LLM is it should be a very strategic move, because think of it in this way, that doing a master degree is like your lifeline. Okay, you don't want to exhaust your lifeline casually. Okay, so when I started IP Leaders, Law Seco, eventually, that time I had no clue how this is going to work out, right? Like in 2012, left my job, worked on this, and I thought that, okay, what will I do if everything really falls apart? Okay, I thought एक तो option नहीं, जाके masters कर लूँगा, right? So that option, but that is an important option, right? I didn't have to do that. Right now, if you have, I see so many people just right after college go and say, okay, let me do LLM now. Okay, it may make sense for them, but if they have a clear objective as to why they are doing it, there are people who want to move to a different country and work there. Great, that is a great reason to do so, right? If you want to practice in the US, doing an LLM over there is a good idea, but then you should actually strategize. Which state am I going to do it in? Right? Which state am I going to do it in? Because you can write bar exam in three states right now in US.
And they have different requirements for appearing for their bar exams.
Yeah, so you have to study that. So it has to be all strategized. If you don't strategize and do LLM just like that, it's not going to fly. Second thing, if you actually want to move to another country, you might want to get certain exposure here in doing a certain kind of work, so that when you go there, you'll have some value in terms of that you are not just another lawyer, but a lawyer with certain skills, which is relevant there. Now, this strategy has to be created and done. If you want to know if I do LLM, it will help me in IP law. People think of LLM like a magic bullet. I have done this LLM, this level lag gaya, now my price must be double, or I don't know, whatever you're expecting, 50% more, I don't know. That does not happen. Okay, I mean, fine, you did not, but of course, people have different.
But those myths were actually, these are very important. These myths are very important. I remember when I joined a firm, they were hiring another one. And she said, no, but I have master's degree, so I want more salary. And my boss called me. She's like, she also has master's degree, but do you have experience? She said, no. It's like, then I'm not going to pay you more. So the experience counts more. So there, Ramanuj is absolutely right.
See, in the end of the day, for a law firm, only thing that matters, or for a lawyer or a client, only thing that matters is that are you getting the work done? Okay? If you are getting the work done, even if you have PhD, that makes no difference, right? So, there was a time in our parents' generation when all these things really mattered. People really cared. Oh, you are educated. Like, so educated. PhD, wow. Right now, but now, number one, everybody knows how easy it is to get any degree anywhere. Okay? People go to, it's more like, there's a misunderstanding. Like, I see so many people going to the UK and doing a LLM there, thinking that they'll get to work in the UK, completely not understanding, or somebody is misguiding them. I don't know what is happening. But they think that by going there, they'll be able to start a global career. And there are these essentially universities which have figured out a perfect price point, and they offer this totally for Indian and Chinese students primarily. And the universities exist only because of that. Otherwise, those universities, there are at least 100 universities which should not exist unless for this thing. And what has happened is that they do not let you even stay in the country for more than a day after you're done, because get a job at all. Okay, so completely misplaced expectation. Now, if you have the right expectation, and with that you are going clearly knowing that, why am I taking this university, why this LLM, how it will lead to the next thing, if that clarity of strategy is there is no problem. Otherwise, doing an LLM is like, you are just like, throwing away a lifeline, which you could have used 10 years down the line. How many LLMs will you do if you already did it? 10 years later, you realize, I don't like what I'm doing. Or I need a break. Even I need a break. I want to move to a different country. Right? So many options. So if you want to change, if you want to change of career midway, you have the LLM to bank on. Right? And yeah, bad investment.
Money goes in there, so it's always better to take an informed decision and know that why do you want it, and you really want to, like what Niharika pointed out, that this international perspective is what is important. Now I have understood that through LLM. That is, yeah, that is my shortcoming. If you can understand that without an LLM, great, go ahead. It is possible, very much possible.
Can you go and spend like a year abroad?
It's a lot of money. Oh my God, do not.
Maybe don't pay the tuition fee. So if you really want to go abroad, right? You want to go abroad. Can you find like some kind of engagement? What if you just, I mean, if you want global exposure, very simple thing. I have seen one of my law firm friends do this. Okay, he runs a small law firm. He just every 3 months he makes sure that he goes to a new country. Okay, and as a tourist for 7 days. Okay, 7 days. He's his own farm. He can do that. 7 days. He hangs out there, meets lots and lots of lawyers from that country, potential clients, I mean, he maybe not potential, just meets people, networks there. Okay, so 7 days. So if you go to Singapore for 7 days, and or you go to like New York for 7 days, one your traveling desires are met. The other thing is that you go meet people for business. If you meet 30 people, 1 or 2 of them will tomorrow turn around and call you for some work or refer you somebody else because they have met you face to face in another country. That is quite valuable in another country, right? Now calculate the cost. So I was talking to basically somebody who was a law firm partner in a tier 2 law firm. He was considering doing a LLM from National University of Singapore. Specifically this person at Dua. Okay, so he was considering doing that. So I said, okay, no problem. So he called me to consult. This is like, what is, should I do it? I said, how are you, like, what are the factors? How are you deciding? So he's like, it will cost me 40 lakhs. And I don't remember exactly whatever, like living plus staying, everything, 40 lakhs total. I'm like, is that the only cost? For 1 year, you're not going to work. You are losing your salary, so that should be added to the cost. Number one. Number two, if all this money, okay, let's say it's 1 crore, salary plus, it's more than that. But let's say we take that and we say that this is the money available to us for doing. So I said, why do you want to do it? It's like, I want to, maybe it will lead to some networking, business development, etc. I said, great. So if that is the objective, LLM is not the objective. How about you spend this money, you spend 50 lakhs on business development. You hire people, conferences also, or you can just go and meet people. You can organize your own conference and fly down people from there if you want for that amount of money, right? So what kind of, if you want to spend 1 crore on networking, great, but why give it to a university? If there's a clear, I'm not saying this applies to everybody. I'm not saying don't do LLM. I'm happy to recommend LLM to those people who have a clear strategy for it. But this cannot be it, right? That, no up in the air objectives basically, because that backfires. You are not realizing what you are getting into. This might be one of the most expensive decisions of your life, which you don't want to make lightly. But anyway, let's not make this session about LLM. So the question, yeah. In-house, in-house and law firms. Okay, so when you are in in-house counsel, number one, most of the time you don't get to specialize. 90% of the time, okay? But there are exceptions. There are those 10% cases where people are, especially in media companies, there are people doing contracts, IP contracts, day in, day out, handling IP litigation. This exists. But if you're an in-house counsel, your career growth does not come from specializing in one and only one thing. Because one day you want to become the top lawyer in the company, maybe top lawyer, the general counsel of a group of companies like Tata's, or maybe group, you want to become the group counsel of Reliance, somewhere where there's a group of companies. That's the highest you can go up in that role, right? As a lawyer, unless you're going in becoming a CEO. That has also happened. Lawyers becoming general counsel, then CEO or MD has happened. But as a lawyer, the highest you can reach is general counsel of a group. Now, if that you want to reach that, or even general counsel of a company, then you do not want to restrict yourself to one thing, because it restricts you from getting those jobs. Because the top counsel in a group of companies cannot be an IP expert only, right? Has to have everything. IP should be one of his, maybe one IP litigation, maybe he should know about business structuring, maybe he should, well, there's a whole set of things. Any law can come up anytime. There can be, can you imagine that in a hotel company there are Wildlife Act cases because somebody has sold some meat which was not supposed to be sold, okay, or somebody has killed something. All these kind of things happen, right? And so you are a in-house counsel, you can't say that, I don't know about that law. Some new law comes, you have to quickly start analyzing it and figuring out how it impacts my company, what defensive strategies or offensive strategies I'll take, right? And still you can be an in-house counsel as an IP lawyer. So for example, there are tech companies which have a lot of patent work, and they will prefer having in-house counsel specializing in patent, or they have tons of maybe copyright in pharmaceuticals. Good examples. So pharmaceutical companies. So there are companies which have a lot of work that is so regular. So regularly they are drafting agreements, or so regularly they are prosecuting, so that prosecution, it's rare that in-house counsel does it, because it's in different places, right? All over the country, anytime, anywhere. So you might rely on a law firm. But even then you might have in-house counsels who are monitoring all those cases. Even if you're giving it to a law firm or to individual lawyers, there may be an in-house specialist in trademark litigation or copyright litigation who's monitoring that. So absolutely, if you want to be an in-house counsel, then IP law knowledge might be an asset, but you have to be also prepared to know the other stuff. But in a IP law firm, you can totally do only IP law and do nothing else. So that's the major difference. I think that should make it clear what is your area of interest.
So, I was interning with Bennett Coleman. I was working interning with their in-house, and that internship was fairly long, 3 months. And like my boss had put it, you need to be jack of all or master of all. Like, you have to know every law. Though he introduced me to trademark, but fortunately, I was with Bennett Coleman, so soft IP. And when I say soft IP, it means copyright and trademark. Soft IP was helpful. But if you go to a pharmaceutical company as an in-house, soft IP skill will not help you. You need to have that technical background, because they require patents. For trademarks, they anyway outsource, because trademark is not too much of technical. You do not need an entirely science degree to for filing the applications of in fact, for being a trademark agent. For patent agent, there's a proper exam. It's entirely skill. It's a different skill. So if you have that kind of an approach, then I think in-house is good. If you can satisfy, and which industry of in-house you want to go to. But yes, like Ramanoj pointed, you need to be the master of all the laws. You need to know what's happening, be abreast with all kind of laws, how that law is going to affect your company. And there are bills passed every day, and how those bills are going to impact. So another skill set that I think in-house lawyers should have, from my experience as dealing with in-house lawyers, is lack of policy thinking, policy advisory for their own company. They come up with the terms of use which they have prepared. They are not really aware of what is happening they are not really aware of PRS or what bills are being passed, how those bills are going to actually politically affect their company, the structure of their company. And all of that takes up a lot of time. And I think in-house lawyers should be really aware of that as well. like really well aware of what bills are being passed and what is happening at their head office also, in fact.
So just to clarify then, why should you learn IP and media law if you want to work in-house? The answer is that depending on the industry you want to join, still they value your special knowledge in that industry. So for example, if it's a technology company that you want to work with and you have good knowledge of technology law, technology contracts, data protection law, IT Act, IT Act. So that would be very useful for the company. So they will consider you seriously, although they are not saying ki they'll only give you this work, right? You'll have to do still other things, but they will prefer to hire you. Similarly, if it is a media company and you have good knowledge of IP law and media law, then they have a very good reason to hire you, because they know that we will be dealing with a lot of such matters. So it's one thing that somebody so contracts, but they see so compare like a skill like contracts or litigation strategy, litigation management, right? Now if you are good at one of these things, you are like everywhere you are useful in any company. But if you have a specialized knowledge, that is also highly appreciated at the time of hire, and paid also. You get paid also accordingly, because you so basically somebody who hasn't done any media law work or doesn't have knowledge of media law, it will be assumed that he'll take longer in the company to find his feet or her feet. Okay, but if it happens in you happen to have a good knowledge of media law in a media company, and you know a good knowledge of IP law, then it is assumed that you'll adopt faster. So you're assumed at the stage of interview that you will be a more productive employee. So that is why you should be learning these things if you want to work in those industries. And why I emphasize on these industries, because these are the fastest growing industry. The fastest growing industry in India today is media, and then tech is probably the second. Okay, there was a time when real estate was doing really well, but it's not anymore. So pharmaceuticals, sure. Pharmaceuticals is not India. Pharmaceuticals is a little down right now. Market is down. So patents they are getting done, but overall the presence of companies. So their companies, are, for example, Glenmark sold this India business. Like right now, foreign pharmaceuticals are on the way out, in a way. I mean, the market pharmaceuticals isn't as exciting it used to be 10 years back or 5 years back also.
See, this is a very I am from a law firm background, but this is a very like basic thing. Yeah, when you are hired by a company, you are an employee. When you're hired by a firm, you're not an employee. You're a consultant. That means that the pay scale is very different. The benefits are very different. As an employee, you have a lot of benefits legally. That means that you will be entitled to bonuses, benefits, holidays, health insurance, provident fund, name it and you will have it. As a lawyer in a law firm, you are a consultant. All of that you need to take care of on your own. The firm is not going to sponsor all of this. They're just going to give you a basic salary, which by the way can be maybe very different from the associate at the same level doing the same work. So there's no parity in that. I'm being very honest because this has happened with me.
That's I think very like yeah yeah
It's true. Like when I was deciding if I want to work with an in-house or a law firm, when I mentioned Bennett Coleman, and when they had offered at the same time, I had an offer from a law firm. I chose to go to a law firm because I wanted to I had master's degree. I wanted to specialize more in IP law. I wanted to study IP law more. I knew if I joined an in-house, my options of studying or actually working on IP matters will be really small, even though I don't know if they would have paid me more, but so that analysis you have to do. But yes, as an employee, you definitely get more benefits. The pay is more. I mean, everything is really covered for you. They're really good, like bonuses and Diwali gifts, CTC, Diwali gifts and holy gifts and Lodi gifts and all of those gifts. Law firms will not really treat you that way. I mean, that's the harsh reality, but it is what it is.
Are you still in college? Yes, you're in the first year, right? So I think that's why the question is coming from you. Because slowly when you grow up, you realize most of the establishments and organizations in the world are not democratic. There is like when there is very less of democracy and your where even if, of course I completely agree with her. In pay is that first of all not every if a law firm partner who is basically paying you as in the amount of money he is making at the end of the year, he has to distribute. So basically you're a team cost. You and a stapler is no different. Okay, so you're a team cost. So now he will value you as per your productivity, right? So and if you are more productive than the others, if you have an edge over the others, do you really think then that would be fair, that if the other person who is a overperformer or a overachiever for that matter would get paid as the same way? It's not a government office, it's a law firm. My boss keeps saying this is Sparta. Okay, so like we all are out there to get each other, and it's like, of course we are friends and all of that, but it's actually survival of the fittest. Someone might with you, it's not a government company, that's what I'm saying. It's not the army, like that you're there for 5 years, you'll from a lieutenant I'm so sorry, I have no idea, like from a captain you become that. It's nothing like that. You perform, you make senior associate, you perform, you make associate partner, managing associate partner, that faster. It's about, if today if you're an associate, X things are expected from you, are doing X+1, you'll make senior associate that much faster. If you're Y+2 you're doing, you'll make that it that much faster. And at every stage, the skill set that is expected from you would be different from the company, from the firm. And as much as you can deliver, I think you get paid as per that.
So if it is about you're trying to figure out how to make more money as a lawyer, okay? So there are two rules. One is that you have to go for the niche. The more niche it is, okay, the more money is there in it. If there are a lot of people having that skill and a lot of people ready to offer that service, then you can't make much money in that, okay? So niche is very important. The other thing you need to see is that what is the urgency in a matter. So bail matters are always urgent no matter how many lawyers are doing it. Okay, so and I'll go to the lawyer who can the highest likely to get me a bail no matter how much money I have to spend. As long as I have it, I'll give it. That is how it works, right? So that is very, very important to understand, that you must, if you want to earn more money, you have to, number one, look at how niche it is, that not too many lawyers knows about it, not too many lawyers does it yet. Number two is that how urgent, is there like massive urgency involved in that? What is at stake? Is somebody's life at stake? Is somebody's liberty at stake? Is a big piece of property at stake? Is a lot of money at stake? So that matters a lot, right? That pretty much that defines the willingness of the client to pay. Okay, so that is very important. Another thing that you should look at when you're trying to identify a profitable area of practice is that how fast is that industry growing? Because it is said that a rising tide lifts everyone, right? Every boat. So if it is a fast growing industry, like, when IT boom was happening, a lot of mediocre engineers, you just do a IT degree, whatever engineering degree, they'll hire you, right? So bad engineers will also get hired, okay, without any knowledge. So that was when the IT was growing like that. Now it's not growing like that, right? So all those people are getting fired. And in their middle age, they're suddenly shocked that why am I getting fired? Because sorry, it's not growing as much anymore. Right? The work is not there. Work has shifted elsewhere. So you have to upgrade your skills or whatever, right? Similarly, today, if you say that, okay, you know how to do artificial intelligence or machine learning work, then suddenly you're like, okay, like there's so much demand for it. Even somebody who's not that great at it, who's not able to do a good job, also gets a job, also gets promotion, also gets everything. Okay, so if you can identify any niche which is growing really fast, like media, by the way, and technology, these are like superbly fast growing. And if you look at all the lawyers, they have no clue. I can assure you, I have spoken to at least 10,000 lawyers across India, personally, okay, have gone to and met and like seen and spoken, at least, if not more. I am giving you a like a smaller estimate, okay, conservative estimate. But these people have no clue as to what is media law, what is technology law. Out of those 10,000 people, not more than 100 people would have an idea as to what this is. That is how niche it is, despite it being so fast growing. People get into media and technology industry today not by design but by accident. Like, you know, here you might have one or two people who went abroad, did IP. Even, you know, you have Niharika who did IP, but there she figured out that, okay, art law seems to be really niche, really interesting, right? So that knowledge people don't have. Okay, so that's very critical, because एक तो college में we have this IP still people think of. But who thinks of that I want to be a media lawyer? Who said that I want to be a technology lawyer? Very rare.
Traditional knowledge. I have practiced traditional knowledge, and it's not a field. I mean, it's like it's within IP, but it's cumulative of trademark, IP, and patents as well. And my thesis of master's thesis was on traditional knowledge, and nobody even knows about it. Nobody's ready to pub. Huh?
Tell us about the work that is going on.
Yeah, sure. So the work is that. So I'll tell you the case. Have you heard of the song Nibuda? It's copied from a folklore. Now, folklore is actually a traditional knowledge, which is what. Now, I'll just explain what traditional knowledge is. Traditional knowledge is a community-based knowledge. The community owns it. They do not have the concept of copyright like we do. That since I have written it, so I'm the author, so I should be the first owner of the copyright. It's a community thing. They transfer it through generations. So if like mother, father are singing.
Traditional knowledge, understood.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
No, we need to move on to the.
Acha, theek hai. I'm moving on now. So now there are these Bollywood composers who come and copy those things. Now, as a lawyer, you will not understand this. That you know,
We
it's
don't understand till somebody gives us money.
Exact-
So tell us.
not just money, but even knowledge. I mean, imagine Rajasthan has one small village where this community is singing this song. One Bollywood composer just gets to know about it. How do you prove that in court? How do you show that there was an access of the Bollywood producer to that?
But who's paying for this case?
Huh?
Who's paying for this case? To be
Nobody. We are doing it we did it pro bono.
So there's a pro bono industry for this.
Yeah, there is a pro bono industry, but now things have started. The community is putting in money for this. I'm not going to name the designer, but her designs were actually copied by Kanta workers, like the Kanta. Yeah, I think everybody knows now. I'm not going to delve into that, but yes. So there is a market for it. We just need to find out. We just need to streamline it. Since there is no law, I mean, we use the existing laws, the Tuta Puta trademark law, the Tuta Puta copyright law, and kind of fix it in. WIPO
The
recent.
problem with traditional knowledge is that who's gonna pay for it? That because the community doesn't want to pay for it.
No, that's what my point is. The community has started paying for this now, because they. Yeah, and some.
Okay, so
The basmati rice was a good example. The name was good example. The case, the entire litigation was sponsored.
But like one thing I think who would like to pay for this, we've done a bit of advisory for this, is that like, you know, who comes to you, music publishers will come to you saying that this is our composer and who has copied this song, and now please save us, give us advice, I want to release this song. That is a person who will pay for this. Okay, so I mean, yeah, moral dilemmas don't affect me anymore after I have worked with music rights for for whatever little time. Yeah, so I have like it doesn't affect me. Yeah, of course you. That's all the advice that you can give.
So basically, the idea is to find things which are niche, okay, which have like urgency, which have big money at stake for somebody, right? Money or any life or liberty or whatever.
I feel if you take up these cases, you will get into limelight. And limelight से बाकी चीजें follow होंगी. So create that niche, not just in terms of money, but in terms of recognition also. That this is this lawyer who is willing to take up such cases. I mean, there are no lawyers, even I don't advertise that, yeah, I'll be open to take up traditional knowledge cases. I mean, because there aren't any. It's just, there's just one thesis where I've researched about all these cases, Nibuda, this designer things, because I have interest in them and I've actually gone into depth meeting these people and research, because these are things that are not even published or written about now. So once you actually create that, by creating the niche, I mean, make yourself recognized for that field, that you will be open to taking up these cases.
The problem is that if you have something where there is money, when he's trying to figure out where he can make more money. So this one is a great for an activism, someone who wants to do activism. But if I want to make my name known in an industry as an IP lawyer, if my interest is in patent, I'll start with patent, not in traditional knowledge. So because if traditional knowledge doesn't have any paying clients, then why should I make? If my goal is to save traditional knowledge, that's a different thing. But if my goal is to make money, that strategy doesn't add up.
Indicates that you're aware of this. The moment I say that yes, I've worked in these cases, even the music publisher would like to come to me and say that yeah, okay, she knows, she has argued the case from the other side, she may have more idea about this case.
Sure. So that as long as there is somebody is paying. But even honestly saying, like, the problem with traditional knowledge cases is that first there is nobody to file it. Even the community may not care, and who's authorizing the lawyer in a community? If, by the way, if there are 10 people involved in a case now and all 10 people have to pay you together or not pay, just give you documents, it's gone. Nothing happens ever. And if you are not getting paid and you are going to get a community to authorize you to file a case, yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that Okay, so let's move on from this point. So money making, so I think I have answered that question. So within IP and media and tech, basically there are litigations are increasingly being more and more, money making situations, especially in patents, because patents is something that is very high stake, especially in technology patent, automobile patent, very specific types of patent, especially in technology, because there are a lot of competitors for the same kind of technology. Like, if there's something is being built by Google, Amazon is also building it, Facebook is also building it, and they end up getting multiple patents that then they fight over it. Okay? Or if nothing else, if they don't file litigation, sometimes they have offensive patents and defensive patents that they create a portfolio of those patents. Similarly, smartphones and devices, any kind of hardware, these are like really hot areas, and there's a and there's a huge amount of money at stake. So for example, if you remember, Samsung winning a matter with, lost the matter, I think, with Apple, and Apple got 1.7 billion in damages, right? So see the anyway, there are a lot of different litigations are going on, so let's not get into that. Just I'm telling you that you can get $1 billion damage. So obviously, in such matters, companies are ready to spend a lot of money, right? So that is one area where there's a lot of money. And apart from that, trademark, there are places, like especially in India, where it's extremely difficult. Some companies' survival depends on it. Like for sports, they won't make money. They have bought a huge license from, say, BCCI for a certain this thing, and if people are just circulating otherwise, then they have no exclusivity, then they can't make money, right? They need to ensure that cricket match is not available or the score is not available anywhere else other than their authorized platform. That's the only way they're going to make money. So then they're very happy to spend a lot of money because their survival depends on it. The urgency is very high. So counterfeiting is also another area where there's a lot of money, because it's very hard to get raids done, and there are like enforcement. So agencies which does enforcement and charge a lot of money for it. So you have to just find these kind of things where things are so critical and a huge amount of money or the survival of a company is at stake, and then you have a lot of money on that.
And can I add to that point? So this is also from my personal experience of working with, I had Unilever as my client when I was practicing. So since Unilever, we all know, like they have almost all the products, all the labels, food, toiletries, this, that, Lakme, everything. Okay. So I remember there was this point, and also ITC for some time. So I remember remember when Maggie was banned for some time, there was this thing going on. Yeah. So they were, as a defense, they were trying food safety cases and label protection for all their food items, all the biscuits, instant noodles, this, that, everything. And with respect to counterfeit products and cosmetics or toiletries, we know how the market is. You go to certain streets of certain cities and you know that you can get it. Of course, not the original thing, the first copy, second copy, third copy, for how much price. So it is there very much. So certain companies, they have, even from in-house perspective, they have started, getting agencies do this work, and also they have their in-house team also working on counterfeit products, on raiding and on seizing counterfeit product, then go file a case on that, and the whole procedure, collecting evidence. That's a lot. That's quite like Sherlock Holmes. So, so yeah, so that also happens. That is there. It does, yeah. And okay, with respect to patent, I wanted to add something that just to make sure that you, if you want to get into patent, make sure you have enough motivation for science or technical things. Because even to read a paper, in my LLM, I had to go back to my physics and chemistry books. Okay, it's not funny. Oh my God, certain process patents and all, they have like very complicated stuff. So if you do not have a knack for science, a natural inclination, or you just get it. Sometimes like there are things that are a matter of interest for you. So if it is not a matter of interest for you, then only the legalities of patents might not help you as a professional in, I have now that I haven't worked in patents ever, but then this is how I made this choice that no, I am not going to do this again. Okay, right? Yeah.
So if anybody wants to work in patent, so this most important thing to remember is that yes, technology is the soul of it, right? You have to have an understanding of, if you can't sit down and read a scientific paper, then you should not even try it, right? Yeah. But many of you will be able to. Now, one question is that, okay, you don't have a degree in science, which is necessary for writing the patent exam, then can you do patents as a practice? Absolutely you can, okay? Yeah, so, number one is that lawyers only do all the prosecutions and litigation related to patents. Can you draft patents? Yes, you can, okay? If you it's just a skill like anything else. It will take you 6 months, 1 year to learn, okay, maximum, okay. And the science part is more difficult to learn, rather, okay, but than the legal part. But I have seen enough number of lawyers without any science degree who have learned it and doing great at it. And the question is, how do they file it? You may think that, then I'm not a patent agent, how can I file patents? The answer is very simple. Every person can file it in their own name. Like if I am the patent owner, like I'm the applying applicant, right? I can file it in my own name. I don't need a patent agent to file it. So if somebody drafts it for me, I can always go and file it. A lawyer will do everything, but the signature will be of the applicant and not of a patent agent. That's all.
But lawyers can also be on Wakalatnama, so they can still prosecute. But patent claim drafting has
I'm saying patent drafting has to be done by agent, right?
And also hearings, patent hearings, no, these days, I think
lawyers can do it.
Lawyers can do it. Only for filing it was. So the only problem, biggest, no, it's okay, the rules keep changing, but the biggest problem is that a lot of lawyers believe that they cannot draft patents because if they are not a patent agent, you're not allowed to do so. The point is that what is it that you're not allowed to? At most, you have to hire a patent agent to put a signature on it, right? Or You have to just get the applicant to file it directly himself. That's all. That's all. I mean, there's nothing that stops you from doing patents if you are passionate and interested about it.
And if by chance you do have a science degree, please become a patent agent. That's very monetarily sufficient and satisfying.
That is something that boss would give you extra points for, rather than
Rather than an LLM degree, they will give you brownie points for being a patent agent.
No, not only a patent agent, being able to draft a patent. So, for example, if you show that, yeah, I have drafted one patent in my life, okay, and that is cleared or whatever, right? So it went through, or you have did it for somebody else. Yeah. If you have done that and you can show what you have drafted, maybe they'll check once what you drafted. But if that is enough reason for you to get that job, like one single point, is enough to get that job. Yeah. So any other questions you can answer? We already answered the first part. So basically, so who are the top employers? You have basically industries we spoke about: tech, media, fashion, art, etc. industries, right? Sports, any intermediate entertainment, any creative industry, and also like possibly any any consumer facing company, because they'll have trademark, etc. Now, what is the skill that they need? Okay, so skill also we talked about kind of. So if you're asking where to learn it from, so interestingly, we of course have Lawsico courses, right? So I'll tell you one way that you can learn from Lawsico, and other way you can learn. Let's see if there's any other way. So the way so we have courses which are very specifically teaches all these skills, because when we create a course, we look at, okay, what is the industry requiring for the skills and what they are paying for, and accordingly then we specifically teach those skills, because that's as simple as that. There's nothing else that we teach only those skills. Now that is number one. Now, so of course Lawsico is an option. There are other courses. Be careful, I am not aware of any other course which teaches you the skills. They'll teach you section and case laws, which I don't know. I mean, how helpful is that? Anybody can read anyway, right? That much you learn, that how to read a section and case law. What is the case law, right? You have to read the case law. You have to read the case law. I'm not saying that it's not important. You have to read the section. It's very important. But that alone is not what's going to. I mean, actually, that might be enough to get a job. But to learn the skill is not that what it is.
I don't agree.
So
Knowing the section is not enough. I mean, these days the interviews are very clinical based. They will say, okay, this mark is there, what kind of objections can come? You will simply say section 9, section 11. They'll be like, okay, now draft the response. And the moment you can't draft the response, you will not get the job. In all my interviews, and even when I'm taking interviews for interns, I make them draft. Because that's one skill that is the most valuable. Even she mentioned, I think the entire panel has mentioned that drafting is really important. And the clinical skills are very important. That's a Lawsico program. I liked it because when I'm also teaching the questions and the course that we have prepared, it's very clinical based. We are not getting into section 9, section 11. We are simply saying this is the examination report. There's a section 9 objection, there's section 11 objection. Now you need to prepare the response to it. How are you going to prepare the response? What are the points you need to look out when you're preparing the response? What advice you need to give your client while you're preparing the response? So all of that is what will count. Like that's the skill that you need to have.
So in my opinion, what we aim for in a Lawsico course is that what you will be learning, say, over 2-3 years, we want to try to condense it into a shorter, let's say 1 year, right? So if you can learn that faster within 1 year, if something it will take you 1 year to learn, we should be able to teach you it in 3 months. Otherwise, that is the way we function. Now, that is one way to look at it. Is there any other way to learn? There is another way to learn. That is to find somebody who knows the work and will have the patience to give you the work and teach you how to do it. Okay? Which is way more difficult, way more costly, to be honest. Like if you are going to get a lawyer who knows this work and there's somebody in your family, it is very much possible. If there's somebody who's a friend or like somebody who really cares for you in a family or senior, but question is that would they have this much time over a period of time to teach you? Employers can teach you, but most of the time learning it from employers, you pay the price of it in heavily because if you're going to learn it from the employer and you think that they are basically then they'll hire you at a subsidized price essentially, right? So if you could earn say 10,000 rupees, now they'll pay you 5,000 because they have to teach you. So you are basically paying them in one way or the other to teach you anyway. So the idea that the knowledge comes for free is not correct. But yes, if there is any family member or somebody, somehow you can find a mentor who's ready to sit down with you once or twice a week and show you a new skill and let you work on, like, maybe give you feedback on what you're drafting, etc. That is the alternative way of learning practical skills. And the other way is of course there's a way to get a job, and in the job you learn by making mistakes, trial and error. That's also an option, but that I think is not a very valid option. It's like really bad way to start your career, right? So yeah. So does that satisfy your question? Or? Specific names. Acha, okay. हाँ. Top recruiters of IP lawyers. That's what you're saying. The IP law firms like Anand and Anand in law is very famous, top, very well-known law firm. There's Sai Krishna Associates. There's United IPR, and then so many law firms are there. Sing and Sing. For companies, so obviously tech companies, the top tech companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, yeah, totally. Amazon. And media companies have a lot of Star TV in the media, for example. Star has Disney has Viacom, sure, and like
Most of the media companies are located in Mumbai. So their head offices are in Mumbai, therefore the legal team sits in Bombay.
now you have
if-
channels and all in Delhi also.
Yeah, no, but the legal team sits in Bombay, and a lot of production houses, they have really good legal teams also now. Like I know about Phantom Films, they have good legal team. Another firm in Bombay is Nike and Nike. They do really good media contractual work. And litigation. It's the number one firm for media and entertainment litigation. And
Yeah, so these are some of the employers that you can look forward to. Any other questions we can answer for anybody? Not really. So, okay, we have answered all the questions. Great. Thank you so much. Then, if we will wrap up the session, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for being here, and thanks to all of you for sharing your insights. Thanks. Take care.